So this video is from day 12, Domain and Range Part 1. We're going to be looking at a cooldown called Community Service. The whole point of this is domain and range. And what domain and range are the possible inputs and outputs for a function. So the domain of a function is a set of all possible input values. So depending on the situation represented, a function may take all numbers as its input or only a limited set of numbers. So let's look at some examples. Function A gives the area of a square in square centimeters as a function of its side length, s, in centimeters. The output of A can be 0 or any positive number. You can't have a negative area. I don't even know what that would look like. That happens in calculus, sort of, but it's not negative area. It's just area that represents a negative change. Anyway, the point is the input of A could be 0, so you have no area, or it could be any positive number, like 4 or 7.5 or even a fraction, but it cannot be negative numbers because lengths cannot be negative. And so the domain of A includes 0 and all positive numbers, or we would say that the side length is greater than or equal to 0. Again, input values. So we're looking at area as a function of the side length. Our inputs, our side length needs to be greater than or equal to 0. Function Q gives the number of buses needed for a school field trip as a function of the number of people n going on the trip. Well, let's think about this. Can you have negative? You can have negative people. They're just unpleasant. But can you have a negative number of people? Well, no. So your input, we have Q as a function of n. Our input for our number of people cannot be negative. Can we have fractions of people or decimal people, like 3.8 people? And no, that would just not be 3 people and then one person's kind of short. They count fully as a person, even if they're kind of short. So we need to make sure that our inputs of Q can be 0 or any positive whole number, because again, negative or fractional number of people don't make sense. So we would say that the domain of Q includes 0 and all positive whole numbers. Now, there's another restriction. So 0 is our lowest restriction. We have the restriction of being whole numbers, but we also have to think about the fact that if there's only 120 people at the school, then the maximum number of people going would be 120. So we could say that our domain is limited to all non-negative whole numbers up to 120 or whole numbers from 0 to 120. The range of a function is the set of all possible output values. So going back to that area of a square, that's a function of the side length. Well, if your side lengths have to be positive values, then your areas also have to be positive values. Not to mention the fact that this is squared, so even if you try to put a negative value into here, your area would come out positive. So the area could be 0 and all positive numbers. The output of Q, it's the number of buses. Well, again, it could be 0 or positive whole numbers, and if there's 120 people at the school and each bus could seat 30 people, then you only need up to 4 buses. So your range would be 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. I don't remember what that one is. Did I leave that one out? I did leave that one out. Moving on. So let's take a look at the cooldown, community service. Diego's club earns money for charity when members of the club perform community service after school. For each student who does community service, the club earns $5. There are 12 students in the club. The total dollar amount earned, E, is a function of the number of members who perform community service, N. So E is a function of N. And let's see, what are some of the restrictions here? For each student who does community service, the club earns $5. There are 12 students in the club. So E is a function of the number of members. So the question is, this is our input. Domain goes with our inputs. Is 5 a possible input value? Is it possible that there are 5 students who do community service. How about this? If the club earns $5 for each student and your outputs are dollar amounts that are earned, is 24 a possible output value? Why or why not? Describe the domain. What are the restrictions on the number of students that could be put into this? Describe the range. What possible dollar values can we get out of this function? If you get stuck, consider creating a table or a graph, but I don't think you're going to need that. If you have any questions, let me know.